Welcome to our channel, your gateway to the most spine-chilling tales and unnerving true stories. Today, we present a harrowing true account, The Forest of Terror. Get ready to be on the edge of your seat as we delve into this unsettling narrative. But be warned, comfort is the last thing you'll find here. Aidan, an artist with a troubled past, finds himself stranded in the heart of the Irish forest. His car has broken down, leaving him no choice but to seek shelter in a secluded cabin that sits deep within the dense woodlands. The cabin is old and dilapidated, but it offers him a glimmer of hope in this desolate place. As he approaches the cabin, he can't help but feel a sense of unease creeping up his spine. The forest is eerily quiet, and the air is thick with an unsettling stillness. Aidan gathers his belongings and carefully opens the creaky door to the cabin. The interior is just as rundown as the exterior, with peeling wallpaper and a musty odor that suggests neglect. He begins to explore the cramped living space, searching for anything that might help him pass the time or make him feel more comfortable. His search leads him to a small, dimly lit room in the back of the cabin. The room is cluttered with paintbrushes, canvases, and various art supplies. It's clear that this is where Aidan plans to spend most of his time while he's here. As night falls outside, the forest comes alive with eerie whispers and the sounds of creatures that Aidan can't quite identify. He tries to ignore the unsettling noises, focusing instead on building a makeshift fire in the cabin's fireplace. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows across the walls, providing Aidan with a brief sense of warmth and security. Moments later, Aidan hears footsteps approaching the cabin. He cautiously peeks through the window and sees three strangers approaching: a young woman named Emily, an elderly man named Thomas, and a mysterious figure named Victor. They introduce themselves and explain that they too were stranded in the forest after their car broke down. They had been searching for help when they stumbled upon Aidan's cabin. As they settle in for the night, Aidan can't shake the feeling that something is not quite right. He keeps hearing strange noises coming from outside, and Emily seems to be acting a bit oddly. Despite his growing unease, he tries to make the best of the situation and focus on staying alive. Throughout the night, the creatures outside grow bolder, launching brutal attacks on the cabin. Aidan, Emily, Thomas, and Victor are forced to band together in a desperate struggle for survival. They barricade the doors and windows, lighting torches and brandishing makeshift weapons as they prepare for the next assault. The tension is palpable, and the air is thick with fear and adrenaline. Just as dawn begins to break, a massive creature crashes through the front door of the cabin. It's unlike anything Aidan has ever seen before, a hulking beast with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes. In an instant, it has Emily pinned to the ground, her cries of terror echoing through the cabin. Aidan and the others spring into action, attacking the creature with everything they've got. After a brutal battle, they manage to kill the beast and free Emily from its grasp. As they catch their breath, they realize that they're not out of danger yet. The forest is teeming with more of these creatures, and they must find a way to escape before they are all killed. Aidan looks to Emily for guidance, knowing that she must have some idea of how to navigate the treacherous terrain. Together, they formulate a plan to lead them to safety. Their journey through the forest is fraught with peril, as they must constantly evade and fight off the relentless creatures that hunt them. Along the way, they learn more about each other and the reasons behind their sudden appearance in the forest. As they draw closer to civilization, they begin to hope that they might actually make it out alive. But the forest is unpredictable, and the creatures that stalk them are ruthless. They know that they can't let their guard down for even a moment if they want to survive. As the fire crackled and danced, casting its warm, golden glow across the cabin's interior, the five strangers huddled together for warmth and comfort. Aidan glanced over at Emily, the young woman who had been shivering uncontrollably since they'd first sought refuge in the cabin hours ago. He reached out and gently placed his arm around her shoulders, offering what little comfort he could. The elderly man, Thomas, stared into the fire, lost in thought. His wrinkled face was etched with lines of pain and loss, a testament to the hardships he must have endured in his long life. Aidan couldn't help but wonder what secrets Thomas was hiding, what untold stories lay buried deep within that weathered soul. Victor, the enigmatic figure who had been accompanying Thomas since they'd arrived, seemed to be observing them all intently. His dark eyes flickered from one face to another, as if he were searching for something, or someone. Aidan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Victor than met the eye. The air in the cabin was thick with tension, the silence punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the howling of the creatures that lurked just outside. Despite their best efforts to ignore it, The whispers of the beast seemed to seep into their minds, fueling their fears and doubts. Do you think they'll ever stop? Emily whispered, her voice shaking. Those things. They're not like anything I've ever seen before. I don't know, Emily, Thomas replied, his voice gentle. But we must have faith that we'll find a way to survive this night. But what if they're not alone out there? Aiden asked, nodding toward the darkness beyond the cabin's windows. What if there are more of them? Victor's dark eyes narrowed. There are always more, he said cryptically. You must learn to accept that. The group fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they sat there, huddled together against the cold and the dark, Aiden couldn't help but feel as if they were all playing a game of cat and mouse with an unseen adversary. It was as if they were pawns in some twisted game, being manipulated by forces beyond their comprehension. And then, from the shadows, they heard it. A whispered voice, speaking in a language that was wholly unfamiliar to any of them. The voice seemed to echo through the cabin, chilling them to the bone. Victor stiffened, his eyes widening in recognition. What was that? Emily asked, her voice trembling. What did it say? Victor didn't answer her. Instead, he rose slowly to his feet, his movements graceful and fluid despite his age. He stepped toward the fireplace, his dark eyes fixed on something unseen. As the others watched, he began to speak in the same strange, whispered language that they'd heard moments before. His voice was strong and clear, as if he'd been speaking it his entire life. The room fell silent, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the beating of their hearts. Then, slowly, the shadows began to recede, revealing a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was tall and imposing, its features obscured by darkness. As they stared at it, they realized that it was not a creature at all, but a man who spoke the same strange language as Victor. Who are you? Aiden demanded, his voice shaking with fear and anger. What do you want from us? The figure in the corner did not respond. Instead, it stepped forward, revealing itself to be an elderly man, his face lined with age and weariness. He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes filled with sadness and regret. I was one of them, he said, his voice little more than a whisper. I have come to offer you my help, if you will accept it. The group exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of this new development. Thomas stepped forward, his face a mask of skepticism. Why should we trust you? He asked. And what do you mean, one of them? The elderly man smiled subtly. You have no reason to trust me, he said. But I can offer you knowledge that no one else has. Knowledge that may help you survive this night. He gestured toward the fireplace. Sit with me, and I will tell you what I know. The group hesitated, but in the end, they could not ignore the potential advantage he offered. They took their seats around the fireplace, gazing up at the old man with a mixture of hope and suspicion. As he began to speak, they leaned in closer, desperate for any information that might give them an edge in their fight for survival. For generations, the old man began, my people have lived in harmony with the creatures that now hunt you. We understood their ways, and they understood ours. But recently, something has changed. A great darkness has fallen upon our land, and with it has come a new evil. Creatures unlike any we have ever encountered before. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke, and tears welled in his eyes. They are not of this world, he whispered. They have come from another, seeking to consume all that is good and pure. The group sat in stunned silence, absorbing this new information. Finally, it was Aiden who broke the silence. So, what do we do? How do we fight them? He asked urgently. The old man sighed. I do not know the answer to that, he admitted. But I can tell you this. The key to defeating them lies within yourselves. You must find the courage to face your deepest fears, and the strength to stand together against the darkness. As he spoke, the fire in the fireplace seemed to grow brighter, its warmth spreading out to encompass the group. It was as if the very words he spoke were infused with some sort of power, some indefinable force that made them feel more hopeful, more determined to survive. When he finished speaking, there was silence once more. Finally, Thomas rose to his feet. Thank you, he said simply. Your words have given us much to consider. We will take your advice to heart, and do our best to find a way to defeat this evil that threatens us all. The old man nodded gravely. Then I will bid you farewell, he said. Remember, the fate of your world rests in your hands. May the light guide you. With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the group alone once more with their thoughts and their fears. As they sat there, staring into the fire, Aiden couldn't help but feel a new sense of purpose coursing through him. It was as if something had shifted within him, as if he'd been given the strength to face whatever lay ahead. And though he still had no idea what the future held, He knew that they would find a way to survive together. Their survival depended on it. The others seemed to feel it too, for they looked at him now with a newfound respect, a newfound trust. It was a bond forged in the crucible of terror and loss, and Aiden knew that they would need to hold onto it if they were to stand any chance against the darkness that lay ahead. So, when the time came to face their final challenge, they would face it together as a family, as a group of unlikely heroes who had been forged in the fires of adversity and emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would find a way to save not only themselves, but their entire world. The howling of the wind outside seemed to fade into the background as they sat there, lost in their thoughts and their hopes. And as the first rays of dawn began to creep through the windows, Aiden couldn't help but feel a sense of determination and purpose welling up inside him. They would survive this night, he was certain of it. They would find a way, because they had no choice. The fate of the world rested on their shoulders, and they would not let it down. They would be the light in the darkness, the hope for those who had none. They would be the heroes that their world so desperately needed. And so, with renewed strength and courage, they faced the dawn, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. For they knew that the fate of the world depended on them, and they would not fail. They would not give up. They would not surrender to the darkness. Not while there was still a chance to save everything they loved. Emily, her heart racing, took a deep breath as she shared her nightmares with the group. For as long as I can remember, I've been haunted by these creatures, she said, her voice shaking. They've been in my dreams, lurking in the shadows, waiting to tear me apart. Aiden glanced over at her, his expression solemn. Victor, who had been silently listening to their conversation, finally spoke up. I believe these creatures are connected to an ancient Celtic legend about the Fomorians, he said, his voice filled with a mix of fascination and fear. They were giant monsters who once roamed the land, feared by all who dwelt here. What do you suggest we do, then? Thomas asked, his eyes wide with worrying. Well, Victor continued, if we can lure them away from the cabin, we might have a chance to escape into the night. The group exchanged nervous glances. How do we do that? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Victor thought for a moment before responding. I've studied these creatures for years. They seem to be drawn to sounds and lights. If we can create a diversion, something loud and bright, they might be distracted long enough for us to slip away. But what about the others who are still out there? Aiden asked, gesturing vaguely into the darkness. What if they just follow us? That's a risk we'll have to take, Victor replied, his voice steady. But it's better than staying here and waiting to be killed. The group fell silent, each one lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Emily spoke up. All right, let's do it. Whatever it takes to get out of here alive. They all nodded in agreement, bracing themselves for what lay ahead. Victor began to gather whatever materials they could find. Bits of broken glass, sticks, and even some strips of cloth. As he worked, he whispered to himself, repeating words in the strange language they had heard earlier. When he was finished, he stood up and addressed the group. All right, everyone. This is going to be dangerous. But if we all stay together and move quickly, we might just make it out of here alive. Aiden, you'll lead the way. Emily, Thomas, and I will follow close behind. Once we're far enough away, we'll set off the distraction. Ready? The artist nodded, swallowing hard. The others nodded as well, their faces pale in the dim light. They crept silently through the forest, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air was thick with tension and fear. Finally, they reached a clearing just outside the cabin. Aiden gestured for the others to hide behind some nearby trees. They did as he said, crouching low to the ground and trying to make themselves as small a target as possible. Victor, Emily, and Thomas huddled together, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Are you ready? Victor whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their racing hearts. They all nodded, their faces grim. Together, they held up the makeshift torch they had constructed and lit it, the flames dancing wildly in the night air. As one, they raced towards the cabin, the light flickering before them like a beacon. The creatures, drawn by the light and sound, emerged from the shadows, their monstrous forms silhouetted against the night sky. They hissed and snarled, their eyes fixed on the source of the disturbance. Aiden led them away from the hiding place, weaving through the trees and ducking behind rocks and bushes. The others followed close behind, their hearts in their throats. Finally, they reached the edge of the forest, the endless expanse of moonlit meadow stretching out before them. They paused for a moment, catching their breath and gathering their wits. The creatures were still following, closing in on their position. They could hear their footsteps growing louder, their hisses and snarls echoing through the night. "Now!" Victor cried, hurling the torch towards the meadow. It landed with a sputter, sending up a shower of sparks and embers. The creatures paused, momentarily confused, before turning towards the light. The group took advantage of their confusion, dashing across the meadow and disappearing into the darkness beyond. They ran for what seemed like hours, their legs aching and their lungs burning. But eventually, they could no longer hear the sounds of pursuit. They stumbled to a halt, leaning against each other for support. "We did it," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their ragged breathing. "We escaped." They looked at each other, each one realizing that they had made it through the night. They had survived the horrors of the cabin and the creatures that had haunted them. But as they stood there, bathed in the pale moonlight, they knew that the nightmare was far from over. For as long as they lived, the memory of what they had seen and experienced would remain with them, a dark shadow cast over their lives. As they continued on, their steps growing more determined, they vowed to find a way to stop the creatures, to put an end to the terror once and for all. For they were no longer just a group of strangers, drawn together by chance. They were survivors, bound together by the unbreakable bond of shared experience. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, until the nightmare was over and they could finally find peace. As the sky begins to fade into a deep indigo hue, the group huddles around the dwindling campfire. Emily and Aiden sit close together, their bodies radiating warmth, as they share stories of their past lives. Aiden tells her about his travels as an artist, showcasing his work in galleries around the world, and Emily recounts her childhood in the forest, playing with the animals and learning the ways of the land. Victor and Thomas listen intently, each reliving their own memories through the stories of the young couple. The elderly man, Thomas, takes a sip of the stew they've made and nods in satisfaction. "That was delicious, Emily. You've really outdone yourself." She beams with pride, her cheeks flush from the warmth of the fire. Victor eyes the stew hungrily, but says nothing, lost in thought. "So," Aiden begins, breaking the comfortable silence. "Victor, you mentioned something about the creatures being connected to a Celtic legend. Can you tell us more about that?" Victor hesitates for a moment, glancing around to make sure they're alone before speaking in hushed tones. "The Fomorians," he says, his voice filled with dread. "They were giant monsters that once roamed the land, feasting on anything that crossed their path. They were said to be cruel and merciless, with no regard for life. According to legend, they were eventually defeated by a group of brave warriors, but some say that not all of them were destroyed. Some say that they merely retreated to the shadows, biding their time until they could return." The group exchanges uneasy glances, each lost in their own thoughts. "If that's true," Emily whispers, "then it means that they could still be out there." Her voice trails off, and the silence that follows is heavy with fear. After a long moment, Victor stands, gesturing for the others to follow him. They walk a short distance away from the fire, huddling together in the darkness. "We need to create a distraction," he says firmly. "I have some of their calls recorded on my phone. If we play them back, it might lure them away from the cabin." They nod in agreement, and Victor retrieves his phone from his pocket. With shaking hands, he presses play, and the eerie, whispering language fills the air. The sound is unsettling, like nails on a chalkboard, and they can feel the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. But they know it's their only chance. As the recording plays, they begin to scatter, moving through the forest in the direction opposite of the cabin. Aiden and Emily lead the way, their hands clasped tightly together as they run. They can feel the weight of the weapons they've gathered in their other hands, and with every step, they pray that they're making the right decision. The trees around them seem to close in, blocking out any sign of the cabin or the creatures that pursue them. The air grows thick with the stench of damp earth and fear, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, a branch snaps nearby, and Aiden whirls around, his heart hammering against his ribcage. He sees nothing but darkness and shadowed figures darting between the trees. They continue to run, their feet slipping on the wet leaves and branches that litter the forest floor. The sound of the creatures grows louder, their harsh breathing and guttural cries echoing through the night. Aiden glances over his shoulder and sees Emily stumble, her foot caught on a root. He reaches out to steady her, but before he can, she's yanked away from him, her screams tearing through the silence. "Emily!" he cries, pushing past the fear that grips him. He sprints after her, the world around him spinning as he tries to keep up with her attacker. He catches sight of a massive, misshapen figure lumbering through the trees, its long, clawed fingers reaching out for her. With a primal scream, Aiden launches himself at the creature, swinging his makeshift weapon with all his might. The impact sends a shockwave through his body, and pain explodes in his shoulder. He drops the weapon and scrambles back, barely managing to avoid another blow. The creature towers over him, its cruel features twisted in a grin. Its breath smells of rot and decay, and its eyes gleam with a malevolent intelligence. As it lowers its head, preparing to deliver the killing blow, Aiden feels a surge of adrenaline course through him. He reaches out and grabs a nearby branch, using it to propel himself up and out of the way. The branch snaps, sending him tumbling through the air, but he manages to land on his feet. He spins around, drawing his makeshift sword once more, and meets the creature's attack. The two fight furiously, their weapons clashing and sparks flying. Aiden's strength begins to fade, and he knows he can't hold out much longer. Just as he thinks it's all over, he hears a shout from behind him. Turning, he sees Thomas, brandishing a shovel, charging at the creature. With a mighty swing, the old man connects, hitting the creature square in the back. It stumbles, giving Aiden the opening he needs. He lunges forward, plunging his weapon deep into its chest. The creature lets out a guttural roar, and then collapses, its massive weight crushing Aiden beneath it. He struggles to breathe, the air pressing painfully against his ribs. As the darkness begins to close in, he feels a sense of calm wash over him. He thinks he sees Emily, smiling down at him, before everything fades to black. When Aiden wakes up, he finds himself back at the cabin. The others are gathered around him, their faces etched with worrying. "Are you okay?" Emily whispers, her hands trembling as she touches his cheek. He nods, wincing as the pain in his ribs flares up. "I think we did it," Thomas says, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The creatures are gone. We should get out of here, just to be safe." The group nods in agreement, and they begin to gather their things, preparing to leave. Before they go, they all take a moment to honor their fallen comrade. They dig a shallow grave in the woods, and bury Thomas next to the others who didn't make it. They say a prayer, promising to never forget them, and then they turn their backs on the cabin, walking into the uncertain future. As they walk, Aiden reaches into his pocket and retrieves the recording device. He deletes the file containing the creature's language, knowing that it's no longer needed. The air grows lighter as they put distance between themselves and the horrors they've faced, and they begin to feel hopeful again. Maybe, just maybe, they can find a way to survive this new world, and maybe even rebuild it. The forest around them seemed to close in, the trees forming an impenetrable wall of greenery as far as the eye could see. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky an eerie shade of purple and orange. Aiden and Thomas, exhausted and terrified, stumbled through the underbrush, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had managed to lose the creatures for the moment, but they knew that it was only a matter of time before they were found. As they pushed deeper into the forest, they came across an ancient ruin, its crumbling stones covered in moss and ivy. The air was thick with a sense of history and mystery, and Aiden could feel Emily's presence nearby. He hurried over to her, relief flooding through him when he saw she was still alive. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking. "Are you okay?" She winced, her face pale and drawn. "I think I'm bitten," she said, pointing to her arm. "It hurts so bad." Thomas knelt beside her, his expression grim. "It's going to be okay," he said, gently feeling her arm. "We'll find a way to help you." "The creatures," Aiden said, his voice shaking. "They're still after us. We need to find someplace safe, somewhere they can't reach us." "There's nowhere safe from them," Thomas replied, his voice laced with despair. "They've been here for centuries, hiding in the shadows. They know these woods better than anyone." They looked around the ruin, searching for some sort of shelter or hiding place. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant howl of the creatures. Aiden's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and he could feel his panic rising. "We have to do something," he said, his voice shaking. "We can't just wait for them to find us." Thomas nodded, his expression grim. "Victor might know something about these creatures. He's been studying them for years. Maybe there's something in his notes that can help us." They searched through Victor's belongings, frantically flipping through pages of arcane symbols and notes. Aiden's fingers trembled as he turned the pages, his mind racing for some sort of answer. And then, in the dim light of his flashlight, he saw it. A small, worn book, its leather cover almost falling apart. The title was written in a language he didn't recognize, but he could feel its importance radiating off the page. "Thomas," he said, his voice shaking. "I think this might be it." Thomas took the book from him, flipping through the pages quickly. His brow furrowed as he read, a look of concentration etching itself into his features. After several long moments, he looked up, his expression hopeful. "There's a passage in here about a special plant," he said. "It's called bog myrtle. Victor says that it has the power to heal wounds inflicted by the Fomorians. We need to find some, if we want to save Emily." Aiden nodded, his heart heavy with determination. They didn't know how much time they had left, but they had to find the bog myrtle and get Emily the help she needed. Together, they set off into the depths of the forest, their only guide Thomas's translation of the ancient text. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees towering above them like giants. The creatures' howls echoed through the air, their distant footsteps pounding in Aiden's ears. They trudged on, their pace slow and labored, the weight of their fear and desperation pressing down upon them like an invisible hand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they spotted a small clearing ahead. In the center of the clearing grew a cluster of bog myrtle plants, their white flowers glowing like stars in the darkness. Aiden's heart leapt with hope as he saw them, and he pushed himself to move faster, his legs burning with the effort. They reached the plants in record time, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Thomas knelt beside Emily, gently rolling up her sleeve. He plucked a bog myrtle flower from the ground and crushed it between his fingers, releasing a sweet, earthy scent. He carefully dabbed the crushed petals onto Emily's arm, murmuring words of healing under his breath. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Aiden and Thomas exchanged worried glances, afraid that the bog myrtle had no effect on Emily's wound. And then, slowly, her breathing began to steady, and the color started to return to her cheeks. Relief flooded through them both as they realized that they had actually done it. They sat back, catching their breath, their eyes darting around the forest, waiting for the creatures to appear. But the silence remained unbroken, the shadows unmolested. For now, at least, they were safe. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden light across the forest, they knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to find a way to defeat the Fomorians once and for all. But for now, they savored the small victory of having saved Emily, and the knowledge that they had found something that could help them in their fight. Thomas stood up, stretching his stiff limbs. "We should get moving," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "We can't stay here forever." Aiden nodded, already on his feet. "Yeah," he said, his voice still shaking. "Let's go find those creatures and finish this." Together, they set off into the forest, their steps firmer now, their resolve strengthened by their small victory. They knew that the road ahead would be dangerous and uncertain, but they also knew that they had each other, and that they were no longer alone in this fight. As they walked, the sun continued to rise, bathing the world in its warmth. Ahead of them, a new day dawned, promising hope and redemption. But they didn't forget the darkness that had come before, and they swore that they would never let it return. For Emily, and for all those who had suffered at the hands of the Fomorians, they would fight until the end. And in the end, they would win. As the first rays of dawn broke through the treetops, Aiden, Thomas, and Emily stumbled out of the dense underbrush, their clothes torn and their bodies exhausted from the long night's ordeal. They emerged into a small clearing surrounded by towering stones, ancient ruins that had been hidden from sight for centuries. The air was thick with the musty scent of damp earth and moss, and the calls of birds filled the air. Aiden glanced back at Emily, his heart heavy with dread. She was still pale and weak from the injury she had sustained, but she had insisted on coming with them, determined to find a way to stop the creatures and save her friends. Thomas, the elderly man, moved to her side, offering her his arm for support. "Are you sure you're up for this, Emily?" Aiden asked, his voice hoarse with worrying. "We don't know what we're walking into." Emily met his gaze steadily. "I have to try," she said. "Those creatures have taken everything from me. I can't just sit back and let them take everything else." Aiden nodded, understanding her need for vengeance. Even as he feared for her safety, they followed Victor's instructions, tracing the path through the ruins until they came to a small, hidden chamber at the heart of the complex. Inside, they found an ancient altar, its surface carved with symbols and runes that were eerily familiar. "This is it," Thomas breathed. "This must be where they performed the ritual." Aiden glanced at Emily, his expression grim. "And this is where you're going to have to make your sacrifice." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the chamber. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victor's voice echoed through the chamber, as if he were standing right beside them. "You must pour the blood of the Fomorian king onto the altar, and use the dagger to destroy its heart." Only then will the curse be lifted and the creatures be destroyed. Aiden took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He retrieved the dagger from his belt, its blade still stained with the blood of the creatures they had slain during their escape. "Are you ready?" he asked Emily, offering her his hand. She nodded, her expression determined. Together, they approached the altar. As they did so, the air seemed to grow thick with a sense of foreboding. The stones around them seemed to shift and groan, as if the earth itself was protesting their presence. Aiden knelt beside the altar, setting the dagger down on the cold, hard stone. Emily hesitated for a moment, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the blood-slicked blade. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed her palm against the hilt of the dagger. "You must strike swiftly and true," Victor's voice warned. "The heart of the Fomorian king is protected by its own magic." Aiden nodded, his heart racing. He placed his free hand on Emily's shoulder, steadying her as she positioned the dagger above the bloody mess on the altar. With a sharp thrust, she drove the blade downward, aiming for the heart of the beast. There was a sickening crunch, and a spurt of hot, sticky blood splattered across their faces. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air grew still, and the chamber seemed to shimmer with an unearthly light. The stones around them began to shift and grind, as if the earth itself was trying to shrug off a great weight. A chill ran down Aiden's spine as he realized what was happening. "It's working," he breathed. "It's really working." As the light grew brighter, the creatures outside began to shriek in agony, their howls of rage filling the air. One by one, they fell to the ground, their bodies convulsing and twitching as the magic consumed them. Soon, there was nothing left but ash and bone, scattered across the forest floor like so many discarded toys. Finally, the light faded, and the silence returned. Aiden looked down at Emily, her face pale and drawn, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached out, gently pulling the dagger from her grasp. "It's over," he whispered. "It's really over." She nodded, her eyes glassy with tears. "It's over," she echoed. "Thank you, Aiden. Thank you for everything." Thomas, the elderly man, stepped forward, taking her hand. "You have saved us all, my dear," he said. "And for that, we will always be in your debt." Aiden smiled at Emily, his heart filled with gratitude and admiration. She had faced the impossible with courage and determination, and in doing so, she had saved them all. As they stood there, surrounded by the ruins of the ancient temple and the scattered remains of the creatures, Aiden knew that they would never forget what she had done. They would never forget Emily, the girl who had become a hero in their darkest hour. The howl of the wind carried the faint sound of a ritual chanting, were part of the ancient ceremony taking place deep within their roots. Aiden, Thomas, and Emily stood before the ancient ruins, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. They had traveled far, following the clues left by Victor, and had finally found echoing through the dense forest. The trees swayed and creaked, as if they to the site where they believed they could destroy the creatures that had hunted them for days. Emily, her body weak from injury and the curse of the Fomorian bite, shivered in the cool night air. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the ruins, illuminating the intricate carvings that adorned the crumbling stone walls. Aiden placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, trying to impart some of his strength to her. Beside them, Thomas murmured prayers under his breath, his wrinkled hands clasped tightly in front of him. As they waited for the ritual to begin, Aiden found himself glancing back over his shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that they were not alone. He could almost sense the presence of the creatures, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. But Emily's determination was unwavering, her gaze fixed on the ancient text etched into the stone altar. She knew that if they were to succeed, it would be at the cost of her own life. Finally, Emily stepped forward, her voice strong despite her trembling lips. "We must begin," she whispered, her words carrying across the clearing. Aiden and Thomas exchanged a knowing look, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. Together, they joined Emily at the altar, taking their places around the perimeter. The chanting grew louder, more urgent, as they began to perform the ritual. They spoke in a strange, ancient tongue, weaving a web of words that seemed to summon the very essence of the forest itself. The air around them crackled with energy, the moonlight dancing upon their skin. As they chanted, Emily reached out and placed her hands upon the altar, drawing upon the ancient power that coursed through her veins. The creatures, sensing the threat, began to emerge from the shadows, their dark forms silhouetted against the moonlit sky. They howled in anger and fear, their piercing cries cutting through the night. But Aiden, Thomas, and Emily did not waver. They continued to chant, their voices rising above the din. their focus unbreakable. The leader of the creatures, a towering, twisted figure that dwarfed even the largest of its kind, stepped forward, its massive form casting a shadow that seemed to consume the very ground it walked upon. It bellowed in fury, its eyes fixed on Emily, the source of their impending doom. With a final, triumphant cry, Emily released the ancient power, channeling it directly into the altar. The ruins shuddered, cracking and crumbling under the weight of the unleashed energy. A brilliant flash of light engulfed the clearing, and when it faded, the creatures were gone. The forest lay still and quiet, as if the very essence of the Fomorians had been stripped from it. Eden stumbled forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He fell to his knees beside Emily, tears streaming down his face. "We did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the beating of his heart. "We destroyed them." Emily smiled weakly, her body growing limp. "We saved the forest," she whispered before her eyes closed for the last time. Thomas knelt beside them, his hands trembling as he stared at the lifeless form of his friend. "She was brave," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "She gave her life to save us all." Eden nodded, tears streaming down his face. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," he said, his voice thick with grief. They sat together for a while longer, taking in the silence that had finally returned to the forest. It was a bittersweet victory, for they had lost Emily, and their lives would never be the same. But they knew that they had accomplished something truly remarkable, something that would echo through the history of the forest for centuries to come. As the final rays of the setting sun painted the sky, they rose to their feet, their shoulders slumped from the weight of their loss. They knew that they would carry Emily's memory with them for the rest of their days, and that her spirit would forever be a part of the forest she had given her life to protect. As Eden, Emily, and Thomas emerged from the dense forest, they were greeted by a world that seemed to have shifted on its axis while they were gone. The trees, the sky, the air itself felt different. They had survived, but they would never be the same. Eden and Emily began a new life together, building a small home on the outskirts of the village. They spoke often of their time in the forest, but never in detail. The people of the village respected their silence, understanding that some things were best left unspoken. Eden continued his work as an artist, his paintings now filled with haunting images of the creatures they had faced and the ancient ruins they had discovered. Emily tended to a small garden, her hands forever stained with the dirt of the forest. Thomas, on the other hand, retreated deeper into the woods, seeking solace in the very place that had once threatened to consume them. He spent his days poring over ancient texts, studying the Fomorian legend and trying to understand the true nature of the creatures that had once terrorized them. He became something of a local legend, with villagers coming from miles around to seek his wisdom. And then there was Victor. No one knew what became of him after they escaped into the night. Some whispered that he had perished in the forest, consumed by the creatures he had studied for so long. Others said that he had disappeared, vanishing into the mists of time and legend, his true purpose finally fulfilled. Years passed, and the memory of their time in the forest began to fade. The people of the village returned to their lives, content to forget the horrors that had once lurked beyond the safety of their homes. But for Eden, Emily, and Thomas, the memories were forever etched into their minds. They knew that the world was not as it seemed, that there were secrets waiting to be uncovered. And they knew that, should the day ever come, they would face those secrets together. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves drifted lazily down from the trees and the air held a hint of winter's chill, Eden and Emily sat together before a crackling fire. Emily's hair had grown long again, her once wild curls now tamed by time and love. Eden stroked her cheek gently, his fingers calloused from hours of painting and working the earth. "Do you ever wonder," Eden said softly, "if we'll ever see him again?" Emily looked up at him, her green eyes filled with understanding. "I don't know, Eden. But I do know that, wherever he is, he'll always be a part of us. Just like the forest." And as they sat there together, lost in each other's eyes, they knew that their connection to the forest, to Victor, and to the secrets they had shared would never truly fade. For they were now bound not only by love, but by a shared history that had shaped them into the people they were meant to be. And, like the ancient trees that surrounded them, their story would continue to grow, weaving its way through the tapestry of time, forever etched into the very fabric of existence. Thank you so much for joining me on this cinematic journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Have you experienced a spine-chilling horror that left you trembling? Share your terrifying tale with us by emailing nightmarenetwork@hotmail.com. and we'd be thrilled to feature it on our platform. Until next time, happy movie watching.